The voice is okay, guys? Can you hear me?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. Guys, do you have any comments or concerns about the final to share before we start?
يس يا دكتور، كنا بس عايزين نعرف هو ال MCQ اللي هيجي أو ال true or false هيكون based on ال readings بس ولا ال readings مع lectures ولا
They are not separable. I
I
cover
know
all.
إن يعني بيبقى فيه كل
Both.
readings بس ساعات بيبقى فيه حاجات زي ما تكون زيادة في ال readings عن ال lecture أو عن مواضيع مختلفة شوية.
No. If you understand well the lecture, you will answer the questions, you know, the MCQs or the true false ones.
Okay.
I see things that I just say things differently, but all the readings cover, you know, all the material already covered, you know, what I delivered in the lectures.
دكتور
Yeah.
هو الريبلاي بتاع الكلية اللي جه لحضرتك إن هو هيكون MCQ صح؟ طيب هو حضرتك قلتي يعني في أول السمستر وكده إن يعني الكورس مش بيعتمد على الميمورايزنج وكده، بس أنا شايفة إن MCQ بيكون نسبة كبيرة جدا يعني منه على الميمورايزنج.
It's an open book, so you will have the material anyway.
ما هو أوكي open book، بس أنا هدور في إيه ولا إيه ولا إيه، هي دي الفكرة.
To be honest, I have nothing to do with that.
يعني حضرتك مثلا ما تقدريش مثلا تعملي لنا يعني عدد الريدنجز يقل شوية، لأن بجد الموقف بالنسبة لي أنا صعب جدا.
No. I can negotiate, you know, the readings. You just have to start from now.
بس هم يا دكتور كتير قوي، يعني هم وعددهم كبير جدا، حتى عشان اقعد افتكر كل المعلومات دي كتير قوي، صعب قوي ان انا اذاكر كل ده. حتى لو هو open book انا مش هقدر ان انا اقعد ادور في كل الماتيريالز دي.
Yeah, that's why you should have. This is like the rationale behind any take-home or open book exam. It's not like, you know, having the material and you can look for the answers, you know, at the moment of the exam. But you should have like studied this before, and then you know from where to get what, you know, in the exam, during the exam. So you have to study anyway.
اوكي، ما احنا هنذاكر، بس هي الفكرة انه هم كتار قوي، فانا برضو
No. By the way, this is like Egyptian standard, but this is not like a huge list of readings, by the way. I would have like assigned more readings for this course, but I considered, you know, the context and everything, and this is like the minimum you can get. You just have to get used to this. You specialized in political science, and it all depends on the readings. You have to read more to acquire knowledge firstly, and then to develop, you know, this analytical skills.
Okay, doctor, can the statements be يعني more general, not like
What statement? The questions you mean?
Yes.
General in what sense?
يعني الستيتمنتس ما تكونش فيها تفاصيل جامدة قوي، على أساس بس كمية الريدنجز تبقى شوية general.
Who is talking?
It's Angie.
Angie, yeah. The thing is, the logic behind the multiple choice questions is to pay attention to the details. And I have to assess, like it accounts for 50%. So I have to assess, the degree of understanding as well. I'll give like a wrap-up session next week and we can talk more about this.
طيب دكتور, what about the time?
Guys, please mute the voice. Mustafa, I think.
Coach Chad Busek came to the rescue. They spoke to Les Trent. Your reflexes were like unbelievable.
Those who
I spend a lot of time catching kids, so.
mute the voice.
I instantly broke out.
Okay, Sharif, go ahead.
Doctor, I'm asking about the time for the
timing?
test. Yeah.
I haven't received the schedule.
Okay. No, I mean the allocated time for the test itself.
I think 1 hour and a half.
Not 2 hours?
Mm-hmm. Let me check. You should have received some instructions, no?
No, we didn't receive anything.
You haven't? Yeah, they are still making up perhaps their minds about it. So let's wait and see.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, can anyone remind me about the questions we tackled last lecture? What topic we've been talking about? Sharif?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, remind me. We need like to activate some sort of participation.
Okay, we talked last lecture about the ideologies and how they affect the decision making in concerning
No. The general topic is
state and market.
Yeah. Okay. And then we tackled like the theme from different perspectives. So firstly, go ahead.
To be honest, I did not study any.
I know, like just from your memory. I know.
What I can remember from the last lecture that we first talked about how the ideologies affects the decision making.
Yeah, economic ideas would affect would have like influence on policy making and decision making processes, and we paid special attention to Keynesian ideas after the Second World War and the applicability of these ideas to the European context. What else? So we covered these like the first 3 questions. The first one, we talked about the role of the state in the global south or the periphery, the global periphery, and why some states managed, to achieve high level of economic growth in comparison to others, while others like didn't succeed in the same in achieving same level of economic development. And then and we tackled this from Kahli chapter with his distinction about different patterns of state intervention and different level of state capacity with regard to the implementation of these rapid industrialization and export-oriented economies. And then we talked about Acemoglu and Robinson when they talk about the role of the economic institutions and the interaction between political institutions and economic institutions, and why some economic institutions persist over time, and that we have to pay attention to the political power that actually undergird different patterns of political power, de jure or de facto, that undergird these economic institutions. And this is like in order. And then we covered like the role of economic ideas and whether or not these economic ideas have independent explanatory power in order to influence decision-making and policy-making processes. And today, hopefully, we're going to cover the role of political preferences in creating economic institutions from Robert Bates' 2 chapters, and then these what kind of factors account for divergent social policy trajectories, why some countries would apply or implement these welfare policies and create these kind of welfare measures, while others, and in different forms, and while others actually didn't press these claims. So here you have the slide we missed last time. So administratively, we were talking about to what extent economic ideas in order to have influence over decision making. So we need to look into the viability, the political viability and the economic viability of these ideas, and administrative viability as well. So we need to understand to what extent Keynesian idea actually ideas were suitable or fit into this long-standing administrative biases, because the bureaucrats would be responsible for the implementation of these policies. So the political entrepreneurial qualities of the politicians or political leadership is important, but in addition to that, we need to investigate and look into the institutional capacity and permeability of civil servants and the concentration of power in the hands of political institutions in order to have control over the management, the economic management, and the central bank as well, to what extent it has the power in order to influence and to implement these policies and decisions. So the whole idea here is this kind of how ideas and policies are intertwined, and it has the idea, the economic ideas actually historically had important influence an impact on decision making, but we need to situate this in the historical context of the end of the Second World War, and how the crisis actually, or the context, pushed politicians and economic experts to try out new economic policies, and the hegemonic role of the United States and the creation of some international economic arrangements as well. It helped out with the reconstruction economies and sending some economic experts to for example, Japan and Germany, and this helped, the idea, the Keynesian ideas, to get some sort of diffusion and dissemination, and to get a degree of approval and appeal amongst politicians and economic experts and bureaucrats as well. So today we're going to see, how, from political economy perspective, how politics and political institutions and economic institutions or economic interest, they interact. So we need to look into this dialectical relation between politics and economics, as they are not like separate domains. So we need to look into this political economic dialectic with regard to how economic interest would shape political institutions, and in return, after these political institutions got like established or entrenched, in a way or another, they reshape, the economic interest, and they reshape the patterns of these economic interest would gain some sort of political expression. So we will actually examine this in a particular context, which is Kenya. And we need to understand how economic interest in the post-colonial period reshaped political institutions. And then after the establishment of these political institutions, patronage structure, one single party system, how these political institutions affected, the expression of the political expression of particular economic interest. So the context here is Kenya didn't have any kind of centralized didn't have any tradition of centralized authority. So it based on this kind of ethnic bonds and tribal structures. And when the British authority started to retreat and to to hand over power to the African leaders. So the British authority had to implement what's called resettlement programs in agrarian system. So it had like to transfer, the ownership of lands from foreigners, from white settlers, to the African leaders. So that's why it had to renegotiate, this retreat and transition, of power by through some sort of negotiation with the African leaders. So gradually, it started to give some space to African leaders in the Executive Council and Legislative Council, and this actually triggered, a struggle over lands in this structure of agricultural structure. Predominantly, the economic structure is predominantly based on agrarian system or agricultural production. So this triggered, struggle not only over power, who would like rule the country after the departure of the colonial authority, but also like a struggle over land as well. So here we came to this interplay and interaction between economics and politics, and how economic interest actually helped in reshaping political institutions in the post-colonial period. And then after these political institutions affected in return, the expression, the political expression of economic interest, and their actually the accumulation of wealth as well, and the endurance of some inefficient economic institutions because of the political context and these kind of political dynamics. So after here, like the main struggle over land, so the create some interest from different ethnicities and different tribes that they had claim to land, and they need to manifest this, to express this politically, to in a way or another, to have to redesign political institutions in order to preserve and to maintain their or to gain their economic interest in the first place. So in non-arid areas, so they had like geographical proximity to lands and the density or the size of the population and the wealth. These offered like some resources, for population or for some social groups in order to mobilize and to ask for lands. And this actually, the struggle for land and different claims to land and the struggle over lands, this shaped, the alliances and the building coalitions between different partners and different social groups, and shaped as well, their political preferences over or policy preferences over political institutions. For example, some over like the electoral system and the polity structure, whether or not to adopt federal or highly centralized. So, for example, so you have here two main competing groups that actually dominated the scene in the post-colonial period. So Kenya, African National Union, the National Union, and the Democratic Union. So they represented, like the National Union emerged as the overwhelming electoral power, while the Democratic Union actually represented the interest of the white settlers and some well-off classes, especially those engaged in large operation in agricultural system. So they have like different policy preferences over political institutions, while the former actually asked for or pushed for highly centralized authority in order to enable the state to implement this resettlement programs and to distribute lands, to transfer the ownership of the lands from Europeans to or from white settlers to African leaders. The others actually preferred some sort of delegation of power and federal system in order to delegate authority to regional assemblies that would have like control over lands. So these like claim to land and these kind of different economic interests, these shaped, the policy preferences over the design of the political institutions. And eventually, yeah.
Sorry for interruption، بس حالة وائل الكونكشن بتاعها حصل فيه مشكلة وتحاول تدخل.
I haven't received anything. Yeah, here.
Thank you.
And eventually, the national union actually dominated, and they developed this kind of centralized bureaucratic apparatus to be in charge of implementing the resettlement program. So they created, this land development and settlement boards in order to be responsible for the distribution or the transfer, to transfer, the ownership of the lands. So here you have how like political interest and political criteria would influence, the origins of some economic institutions. Economically speaking, or dividing or in order to divide lands, so you may have like economic criteria or political criteria. Economically, some crops actually cannot be produced in small scale. It needs like a larger units in order to be economically efficient and profitable. But others like dairy herds or maize or coffee beans, they needed like small scales, but others like sugar plantations, they need like large scale operations in order to be much more profitable. So given this economic criteria, if the land development and settlement boards had these like criteria and economic criteria in mind while dividing or implementing these resettlement programs, this would have brought about more efficient economic institutions. But actually some political pressures from tribes and ethnic groups affected the processes of the resettlement and how to divide and to transfer the ownership of lands. So like the more powerful and the well-off groups, they affected this decision by creating two schemes. Low density scheme in order to favor the rich groups, and high density schemes in order to favor the poor. And the main target is to generate incomes and to offer some agricultural inputs and to offer credits to small farmers in order to cultivate these lands, regardless of the crops and whether or not it's economically efficient to work this in small units or to produce in small units or large units. And this actually politicization of resettlement programs, this triggered some social and radical conflict, and radical faction from the national union actually defected, and they created their own militia, and they created their own party, the Kenyan People's Union, but the party eventually banned, and the entire system was transformed into one single party system, because they were not able to push the party, the National Union Party, in order to implement more radical resettlement programs. So that's why they transformed the entire institution into like a concentration of power in the hands of the National Union, and they transformed the legislature into a space or avenue for patronage networks. People they had good connections with party leadership at the national level. They had access to material benefits and some agricultural inputs. So this shift to one single party after the dissolution of the Democratic Union and the prevailing of the National Union, this shift actually affected it was like a manifestation how these economic interests actually shaped political institutions. And these political institutions, as we are going to see, the context of the single party system affected the structure within which economic interest gained some sort of political expression. So that this the change of the political environment or the political context, and this the establishment of the consolidation of the power of the one single party changed the structure of the political incentives. How it actually affected this? It created some sort of non-market institutions. So instead of leaving it all to the market, the price signals, and to market institutions to correct for any imperfections, so the political leadership and this political context, helped with the creation and the promotion of non-market institutions in order to monitor and to closely monitor and to invade, the rural life through establishing some sort of administrative authority and designing legal frameworks in order to monitor, the agricultural processes and the production and the marketing processes. I'm going to explain this shortly in some detail. And these institutions didn't necessarily lead to economic efficiency and served, necessarily the interest of the powerful economic interest. It was actually the opposite way around, that compelled scholars in order to revise, the theory of the group size, Olson's theory of interest group. So you have here large ownership or landowners that they didn't affect actually the regulations and the decision-making process, that they were small in size. And according to the theory, much more easier for them to get together and to lobby in order to shape and reshape the policies and the economic regulations in order to and to turn it, or to actually redesign this in order to accumulate wealth and to serve their own interests. But actually, this is it didn't happen. It didn't happen in Kenya, and we're going to see why and how we need to understand the political institutions and the political context. So, in order to implement these economic policies, so the state had to intervene in order to mitigate any uncertainty and risks, emanated from market operation and capital transfer. So in order to apply and to implement the resettlement programs to transfer, this ownership to African people, they need to stimulate. They need to actually inject, huge capital in order to enable Africans to purchase lands. So in order to encourage, they need to get some loans and to encourage, lenders and borrowers to invest. But because it's risky and they have some sort of uncertainty regarding the future returns, so the state had to intervene by creating some non-market institutions in order to mitigate, this risk about, future profits and future returns, in order to encourage both loaners and borrowers in order to invest in lands and to cultivate lands and to produce products and then to market these products and to serve as inputs in industrial sectors and to enable factories to operate at high capacity. So in order to give loans, the borrowers to give loans, to African people or to some groups, they need to secure, to make sure, they need assurance that these people would repay the loan. So they need to make sure that they will have some sort of production and some degree of income attainment in order to make, the loan repayment. But it didn't, the state again, or the state apparatuses didn't leave it all to the farmers in order to cultivate their lands and to produce, some crops and to sell these crops in order to get income and to repay the debts. But actually the state had to intervene in order to plan the production, to make sure that these lands or farmers would produce at volumes actually sufficient for to attain some income and to repay the loans, to make this kind of repayment. So the state actually planned the production programs. It created committees in order to plan the production, the level of the production, and to make sure that the farmers will get some income, the income targets, in order to make the repayment. And with the marketing as well, so they had to sell the crops, the products, or the agricultural products to state-sponsored cooperatives in order to, and this would deduce the loan repayment from the crop payment. So the state actually took the repayment and gave them the rest of their products or agricultural commodities. So it didn't leave it, to the supply and demand, and it didn't leave it to the price signals, and didn't leave it to the market mechanisms to organize the process. So one other risk that actually gave some space, to administrative authority and state apparatuses to intervene in rural life and to create these non-market institutions that, in a way or another, proved inefficient on the long run. So the cost of information, the role of economic institutions is just to reduce the transaction cost and to offer some sort of informational device, to producers and to consumers. But the thing is, they didn't have like market actors here. They have like some cost of gaining, this information about the conditions of the market and whether or not, if they produce commodities of high quality, they would be compensated for the cost incurred in order to produce this high quality products. Because sometimes in some context or markets, it would be roughly the same and they wouldn't get any kind of compensations for producing, products of high quality. So rational actors or rational farmers wouldn't pay attention or wouldn't care much about the quality of the agricultural products. So the thing is, in order to assure the production of high quality, especially that as a producer you didn't know beforehand whether or not you will be compensated or you will be rewarded for this high quality commodity or product. So it's wait and see. So you had to wait until you get some realized earnings from selling your products, and then you got to know if whether or not you're going to be compensated for high quality products. So in regular or market mechanisms, this should have been left to the price signals in order to determine, these kind of rewards. But again, in order to assure this and to mitigate any cost of information and insecurity or uncertainty, so the state created some bureaucratic apparatuses and agencies in order to monitor, the quality of the products as well, in order to secure, that the outputs of sufficient quality that would enable, the industrial factories to operate at high capacity, and to ensure, that these inputs, would be of high quality that's required from the processing to the final products, or producing, processing, and then marketing. So in order to do that, in order to assure or to offer, some sort of assurance to investors that they will be rewarded for any risk of investment, so they developed, different or created different institutions and different rules by firstly splitting, payment. Firstly, as an agency, as a bureaucratic committee or bureaucratic agency, they made like payment first for the quantity of the inputs, the agricultural inputs, and then after gaining the realized earnings from selling the products, they would make, the other payment. But actually, it didn't work out. It didn't work well with regard to large scale operations and marketing, large scale the products of large scale economies, because with the large scale economies, it's kind of an average quality that will be rewarded. So individual farmers, as an individual, you don't get like, many rewards or many profits from assuring or from producing high quality products. So there is no incentive, for individual farmer in this large scale operations to make sure that they would produce, high quality products. So with this, another risk or another economic institution that emerged, from non-market, another non-market institutions that actually the political context helped to create it. It was like these large-scale agricultural operations or economies of scale. So the thing is, in order for as an investor, in order to make sure that you will produce at high capacity, so you need to make sure that you will have like a sufficient inputs in order to sustain your industrial operations or large enterprises. So in order to mitigate any uncertainty or any risk regarding, you know, this volume or the size of the inputs, so the government also control the volume of the raw materials from the volume and the price as well. So in order to increase productivity in the productivity of lands, so the government intervened in order to enable farmers to produce, you know, specific level of production, and actually it specified, you know, the prices for them in order to give them incentives, you know, to produce these huge volumes. And this actually created, you know, some sort of conflict in rural areas and political struggle as well, because it's created like this division between large scale and small scale in production and processing. It created like modern agricultural sector in some areas, while others remain somehow primitive. And this created like social conflict, and logically and rationally, as a rational actor, like in modernized agricultural sector and large cattle rancher or agribusiness, large owners or large land owners, they may have used their political power in order to restrict competition, in order to prevent, you know, any other investor from entering, you know, the market, and to prevent small holders or small farmers to get access to some the markets. Actually, they did that, but counterintuitively, they were not able to affect the decision or the regulations of the government. So in a way or another, they managed to push for restricting entry in order to accumulate, in order to make sure that they monopolized the market, and they prevented, you know, other investors or other competitors from entering, you know, the same market. This would serve their economic interest. But the thing is, smallholders as well, they had their own political bloc, and the one dominant or the one single party had an interest in supporting smallholders rather than large landowners or large operations, like the interest in large operations. So these kind of rural institutions ironically offered some basis for competition from smallholders. How did that happen? So first, you need to pay attention again to the political environment, and then the incentives to engage in efforts to restructure the market. To what extent, you know, these like large and big investors had incentives in order to lobby, in order to form their own organization, or to act collectively in order to change to restructure, you know, the market dynamics, to restructure these economic institutions. So politically speaking, political leadership at the national level, they have been interested more in smallholders or small farmers, because they needed, you know, they were like the main source of votes. So they needed, you know, the votes from the growers, from like small farmers, more than agribusiness people. So in order to satisfy, in order to offer some concessions for them, in order to cultivate their support from and to build support base amongst, you know, small farmers, so they set high prices for raw materials. This would increase, this would benefit small farmers. They would get, you know, more profits from selling their agricultural outputs or commodities, but at the same time, this would increase the cost of production for large operation or big business, big investors, and these like these like big investors, they didn't have the option to get some sort of compensation by raising the prices, because like the consumers as well, they had their own, they were vocal and they had their own organizational basis. So that's why they would challenge and resist, you know, any kind of increase in prices. And moreover, these large operations are they counted mainly on exports, and at the same time they were not able to increase the prices of the export products, otherwise they would be undercut by other nations. Their products would be wouldn't be competitive comparing to the products of other countries. So these kind of political organization, like the politically organized economic interests, like from small land, from consumers and small farmers or small holdings, they had their own like organizational basis, and that actually prevented giant investors or the large operators actually to compensate for their losses. So they were actually squeezed between these like politically organized economic interests and their cumulative or accumulated large losses. So on the other hand, with regard to the rent extraction and engagement in efforts in order to restructure the market, as like the collective action and the interest group theory would maintain, you need to know like what kind of relationship between these economic interests and political institutions, the main parameters and what the boundaries delineated between actually delineated the interactions between both of them. So these economic interests, in order to acquire some sort of to get some political access, in order to gain seats in the legislature at the national level, so they needed to get some sort of popularity at the local level first. So they need to dangle out some material benefits to appeal to small farmers, to get some support from them at the local level. So they had to distribute some material benefits in forms of like positions in their factories, or like favorable credit terms and favorable agricultural inputs. So they had like to appeal to them in order to get access to political institutions. On the one hand. On the other hand, they had to prove their loyalty to the leadership of the political party at the national level, because they needed some sort of input and preferential treatments with acquiring these inputs that they are necessary for their industrial operation. So by developing, you know, these political connections and proving their political loyalty to the national leadership, so they had to offer, you know, some economic concessions, and to not to push for any kind of a change in the structural change in the existing economic institutions. And they had as well like to provide, you know, some public goods at the local level in order to make this political and clientelistic machine to make it work and to function actually in a sustainable way in the rural areas. So this large size, it's not like the big businessmen that shaped government regulation there. It's large scale and capital intensive enterprises seemed inefficient or ineffective with regard to lobbying in order to change economic institutions and to actually restructure the market institution to their advantage. So they accumulated losses, and they didn't accumulate any kind of wealth. And the same economic institutions, you know, remained intact because of you need to integrate into the analysis the political environment of the single party and the social basis, and what kind of economic concessions they offered in order to perpetuate their control over power, and the rent and the extraction of economic benefits or economic rents, and that actually didn't offer any incentive to restructure the market in Kenya. So this is like how this kind of policy preferences over how economic interests determined, you know, the policy preferences over economic institutions, and then how political institutions, and then how political institutions reshape the political expression of these economic institutions or economic interest. Any question, guys? Okay, so let's move to the last question about the social policy and the welfare spending. What welfare spending and social policy mean? Anyone, guys? If I mention something about social expenditure, what does this mean?
Doctor,
Yeah,
is it
Mohammed?
yes?
Yeah.
Is it related to the social democracies like Sweden?
Yeah, yeah,
So, welfare programs and
yeah. So
something
can you
like that?
elaborate?
Okay, the social democracies are like capitalist economy states, but the thing that they have like the social safety net that saves the poor from getting poorer or living in unbearable conditions.
Yeah. So it's kind of the state would allocate some
Taxes to the yes.
and budgetary sources in order to material resources from the budget to allocate, you know, some material resources in order to spend to offer, you know, some public goods or public services that would serve, you know, the marginalized or underprivileged groups, and or social policy transferred, like transferring, you know, some funds, you know, through subsidies or insurance system or pensions. So if I ask you why the state would do that, we are interested in like the question of different trajectories, why some states would like offer these social policies and welfare spending, while others actually refrain from, regardless of the type of the welfare spending or the social policies. But other countries or other states actually don't bother. So what kind of factors that would account for the causes that would push the state in order to implement these kind of policies?
Doctor, maybe that's يعني, related to what people want. يعني, people are willing to pay high taxes in order to have these welfare programs, while other countries يعني, they do not prefer to pay taxes.
Yeah,
but
so
they're willing to spend يعني, on their own will, not be forced to pay taxes.
Yeah, so this is like business based explanations, how the causes that would actually oblige or motivate or incentivize, you know, business people or employers in order to pay or to make some payment in order to assure or to make sure that this would be allocated for social spending or social purposes. Okay, what else? So try to guess. So this is one explanation, like, and this actually emanates from strategic, you know, interaction and coalition and bargaining relationship between different actors in order to create an institution or certain rules regarding, you know, spending, social spending. What else? So, okay, so basically like social policies or like social spending or public goods provision, we don't we don't care only about this level of social expenditure, but we do care about, you know, the targeting, the mechanisms, or what groups actually these policies target at, and the scope of coverage as well, the scope of beneficiaries of these policies. And this would like create some sort of like fair redistribution of resources, and would benefit, you know, some social groups. And there is kind of regardless of the form of these social spending, so it actually they come, you know, in different forms, like as I mentioned, like offering public service, or like making like social policy transfer. So we do care about, you know, the explanations of these different, what the literature actually says about, you know, these different trajectories of the implementation, what causes or the main factors that account for the emergence or the implementation of these social and welfare policies. So basically, in European countries, that was like closely, you know, associated with the level or the logic of industrialization and the large-scale modernization processes. So these large-scale modernization processes and high level, or the expansion of or the moving, you know, to this rapid industrialization processes, this created, you know, the like a large pools of workers, and needed, you know, some sort of acquiring technological capacity in order to maintain, you know, the same industrial processes or the same expansion in the industrial operations. So this like offered incentives to educate from these like structural explanations. So the operators, or like the state, and like they didn't say more about, they didn't say a lot about the mechanisms, but here the main this kind of created structural incentives in order to offer training and education to the workforce, and to protect, you know, people like they retired, and they were no longer able to serve in industries, to offer, you know, some pension schemes for them. So they didn't offer, it's kind of a statistical like correlation between this level of modernization or industrialization and the level of social expenditure. Another stream in this in these studies focus the streams here focus on the structure of labor market. It's not only like these modernization and industrialization processes that changed the incentive structure, but it changed actually the labor market. And with the change of the structure of the labor market, this affected, you know, the production or the implementation of social policy or welfare spending. For example, these studies compared between Latin America and East Asia. And in Latin America, and they compared like the share of industrial employment as percentage of total employment that remained stable or remained the same in comparison to East Asia, meaning like the structure of the labor market in Latin America remained quite stable. Like with looking into the share of industrial employment, actually they didn't increase, while in East Asia this size increased. And this, again, like no mechanisms here, but it offered, you know, some incentives, you know, to offer some social insurance program and some social safety nets expenditure on social safety nets in order to protect, or to actually to speak to these rising interest, or powerful interest, or in terms of only like a size of industrial employment. So another like variant in this like a structural, general structural conditions regardless of the logic of industrialization, they talked about, you know, the economic opening. When states actually they had like large, they had like a big size of public sector, but at the same time it had the state had to open up their economies to like free trade and to some sort to regulate the foreign investment. So this actually created this volatility of trade that triggered volatility of income that pushed the state to compensate for any threatening any threat would come from this trade opening or economic opening. And that's why the state offers social insurance scheme for unemployment or for like decline in income, or this kind of fluctuation or vicissitude in trade volume. So that's why, in order to compensate employees, for any kind of threatening or threat of external competitions, so the state had to offer, some social compensation in a form of social spending and social policies. So another explanation as well talked about the power of resource, like the balance of power between different classes, and what kind of resources some social classes had in order to push for. It's not the structural explanations, but here you need to focus on the balance of power between different social actors and different social groups that would enable like one particular group to pressure and to press their claims for more social spending and more allocation of resources, for these social policies. So the main focus, as Mohammed mentioned, but not necessarily in Sweden, it's the balance of power that happened in Europe between trade unions or labor unions and conservative forces. So trade unions, they got some partisan representation in the legislature, and with the level of the high level of industrialization and the expansion of industrialization, so the trade unions actually gained more membership, and with the size actually increased and expanded. So the union density alongside the creation of social democratic parties that gained some share in some seats, in the legislature in order to defend the interest of the labor unions or trade unions. So this enabled them to push for more allocation of resources in order to spend on welfare and public goods, or many social transfer or insurance schemes. But there is a problem here in this with this account, because it actually the power of resource perspectives here depicted, this interaction or the power dynamics between employer and employees, or conservative forces, or business, like business people and trade unionists, as a zero-sum conflict. There is no kind of negotiation or bargaining happened between both of them. And the other thing, they depicted, they treated, trade unions and labor parties as homogeneous actor, while like the actually, when these political parties or labor-based parties reached power, they had to make or to build coalition with other parties. So they had like different logic, like electoral dynamics and electoral logics, that these logics actually became separable from like narrow focus on real wages or social spending of the trade unionists actually pushed for. And this was like clear in Latin America, for example. Like some labor-based parties, they had to build coalition with conservative forces, and they had to offer they had to converge on, they had to compromise and to offer some concessions in order to converge on a common policy agenda. So they had to actually to frustrate their social basis or trade unionist leaders in order to proceed with their policy agenda. So it depends on like the existence of other political parties and the availability of different, competitor, to the existing, labor parties that would push for these social policy programs, and the trade unionists as well, the leadership of the trade unions, whether or not, they would follow, this confrontational they would adopt these confrontational strategy, or they would adopt for self-restraining strategy and to push for negotiation with the employer. So it's not like a zero-sum conflict, nor it's neither like zero-sum conflict between conservative forces and trade unionists, nor even, within the same block of the labor parties and trade unions, you cannot treat them as as if, you know, there has been kind of homogeneity between them with regard to strategies and the main target and the main aim at pressing, you know, or pushing for social spending. So that's why another account, you know, focus on, in order to fill in, you know, this gap, the articulated different explanation that focuses mainly on cross-class alliances. So in order to tackle or to address, you know, this zero-sum conflict that effectively and realistically didn't happen, it was like a non-zero-sum conflict between different actors and different social groups. So they offered, you know, this cross-class alliance. So cross-class alliances, they had like two main explanations or two main trends here, like class position. Depending on the class position, like farmers or workers, they had their own preferences. The class positions actually shaped their preferences over social policies, or this kind of strategic alliances and bargaining processes and bargaining leverage between different social actors that actually enabled some players, or that they got to the negotiation table to settle or to agree on the second best preferences. So here with the non-zero sum conflict, the focus like large body of the literature focuses mainly on Scandinavian countries and with special emphasis in these countries. And here we single out, you know, Sweden with the application of this universalistic as this scope of coverage, tax financed social policies. So actually in this context, you know, they didn't have any sort of, that was like before the social democratic parties gained some electoral overwhelming power. So it had like weak labor movement that actually undermined, you know, the explanation or the examination of the effect of social democratic parties or labor class or trade unionists to push for the and political representation of these parties that pushed for the implementation of these policy programs. So here it came mainly from parties that represent the interest of farmers and middle class. So they actually got together and they found, you know, some commonalities and common interest in order to shift, you know, the tax burden to a broader population, to this universalistic tax finance, to impose, you know, taxes and to distribute and to shift the tax burden to the wider population. So the mechanisms, the main mechanisms here are, it depends on the risk profile. If like farmers or employees, you know, they faced, you know, in their workplace, they had like they would face like risk incidents and this kind of high risk profile, as if like accidents or threatening forces or from external competition that would like force them out of their jobs, like unemployment risk. So this risk profile, with this low capacity of self-reliance, they don't have any kind of source of income other than, you know, their current works. So that's why they would push for or they had like some sort of negotiation with employers in order to implement this compulsory accident insurance policies in this with this risk profile of accidents, for example. This would enable employers to implement these to offer these schemes. And with this unemployment risk, you know, employer would implement and would offer this unified insurance contributions in order to compensate employees for expected or anticipated risks. And again, with as Sharif mentioned, I think with this strategic, like business-centered or business-based explanations, it's still, we focus on the stakeholders or the main beneficiaries of these social policies as working classes, farmers, or middle class. But what actually incentivize or push or motivate or enable like business associations and business people to accept in the first place to pay taxes and to offer these social insurance scheme, for example. as it's not a zero-sum game. So this trend or this stream in the literature focuses on business strategic alliances and the second best preference, like perhaps like as an investor or as like a businessman, you don't have any interest in paying for a social insurance scheme or paying like high taxes in order to implement or to provide public goods, to enable the state to provide public goods, but you settle on second best preference with this kind of bargaining leverage or negotiation between different actors and different players, paying attention to the strategic considerations as well as like running your own business. So you take into your consideration the skill composition of the workforce. So you may have like interest as well in order, given the market, the state of the condition of the level of the competition in the market and the composition, the skills needed in order to run your business or your enterprises. So it's like, strategically speaking, business people may like channel some resources in order to in order to provide for these social and public goods and to implement these social insurance schemes. And relative risk profile as well. So in order to get people to work in their enterprises or in their like firms, so they had to offer them insurance and insurance scheme in order to compensate for anticipated risks. So like these explanations, like structural conditions regarding economic opening or openness or logic of industrialization, and the power of resource perspectives and cross-class alliances, they offered some explanations, but they focused like basically the cross-class and the power resource perspectives. They focus on the interaction between different actors or different market actors, but they actually they left out the state of the analysis. So bringing the state back into the analysis. So we need to highlight the role of the social bureaucrats, that they would like implement these policies that would create their like autonomous enclaves or fiefdoms inside the state inside the bureaucratic apparatuses that would block or reverse even these social policies. As we mentioned last time, these kind of policy preferences administratively, as I hinted at in the beginning of this lecture as well. So the literature on the power of economic ideas dealt with the ideas in relation to the political and economic and administrative viability of these ideas, because it highlighted the important role of the state bureaucrats, because they actually control access to the information, and they had like the inside knowledge, and they had some resources that would enable facilitate the implementation or block the implementation of these. So the policy preferences of like state actors or bureaucratic elites, actually they are essential in order to understand why some would push for, why some states enact some welfare policies while others actually refrain from enacting these, and existing policies and previous experiences as well. For example, like import substitution industrialization in Latin America, it created some winners of these inside the state apparatuses from state-owned enterprises. So they had like stake, and they derive some benefits from these policies. So shifting economic policies or steering the developmental policies away from this state-led development models to market-oriented models, this created losers even from within the state bureaucratic apparatuses, that they would actually resist the implementation of the new policies. So here, with regard to the social policies, they would actually with this example, actually they would resist any attempt or any effort to eradicate or to privatize the pension system or the social insurance, the social insurance system. So one important explanation with regard to the state-centered approaches, or it may serve as like compromise or building blocks, between different theoretical explanations. Here, as I mentioned, like policies, certain economic policies produce politics, like neoliberal policies, market-oriented policies, like import substitution or state-led development policies, any kind of public policy or any kind of economic policies, these policies created some vested interest and some powerful interest groups that they had stake in perpetuating and maintaining the status quo. So changing, these changing, this policy, changing economic policies or social policies, this would mobilize, latent groups in order to push for their claims. So but it didn't happen in Latin America. But the shifting, to these import substitution policies, it benefited, the labor movements or the labor parties. So shifting, from state-led development policies to market-oriented policies, this domestic enterprises or business people alongside labor and previously politically mobilizable trade unionists, they became the main losers. So this change in the policies would actually push them to push for a new different, social scheme, or a new different social welfare spending or social expenditure. It didn't happen, but it didn't happen in Latin America. But this is like the underlying logic, like having this kind of politics, emanated from the implementation of particular policies. This would create interest groups that they would be readily mobilizable in order to push for new policies, to change existing policies, or to push for new policies, including social expenditure. And this emanated mainly from this distribution conflict, that any policies would create winners and losers, and this actually would prevent the losers actually from previous economic policies or social policies would prevent any implementation of new economic policies. And by the same token, with the neoliberal or the market-oriented policies, if they had a stake in trade openness and deregulating, foreign investment, so these actually this would prevent, the mobilization of other social groups to push for and block, their any effort to implement other social policies that would lead to any kind of redistribution of income through taxation policies or through taxation or increasing, these kind of increasing their bargaining leverage with regard to the employers in order to get more social concessions, especially inside, the private firms. So here, in order to answer why different countries have different political trajectories with regard to welfare and public spending, so you have this structural explanation that focuses, the explanation focuses on the industrialization and modernization logic, or economic openness, and then power resource perspective and cross-class alliance, and then state-centered approaches by giving state elites or state actors independent account with regard to implementation or blocking the implementation of particular policies. So again, these are the main questions, the main theoretical questions we addressed this week, and we examined how the existing literature or studies actually offered some answers to these theoretical questions. So we answered the first three: the role of the state, economic institutions in relation to political power, the role of or the power of in economic ideas, and then the dialectical relationship between economic interest and political institutions, how they actually affect each other, or the dialectical interaction, the interaction between both of them, how how economic interests actually shaped institutional design or political institutions, and then these political institutions would acquire even partially autonomous position in order to affect and reshape the perception or the political expression of economic interest, with particular application or emphasis on Kenya, and how like the political environment actually created, non-market, promoted non-market institutions, and these non-market institutions actually affected policy preferences and political institutions, and these political institutions enabled, some inefficient or precluded, powerful or capital-intensive investors from affecting, the regulation or the direction of the state policies. So this dialectics between economic and political domains, and then and finally we tackled the issue about, different factors that account for divergent trajectories with regard to the implementation of welfare and social policies.
دكتور معلش
Yeah.
يارا سليم ويارا طارق وروضة مراد يعني حصل لهم حاجة في الإنترنت فهم بيحاولوا يدخلوا، هم أصلا already كانوا جوه.
I know. Yeah, okay guys, any question? So I touched upon one of the recommended, touched upon dependency theory. I just touched upon this last time, and we talked more about, cultural explanations, and I hinted at, this cultural explanation, and when we talked about, modernization, and you have like one of the recommended chapters, they have like this different applications of theoretical rational truth theory and cultural and structural with regard to East Asian countries. So this is recommended. If you need, I covered, in a way or another, I covered them all, but differently. I covered them, I articulated, the main ideas, differently in these two lectures. But if you want to understand more or to have like, to digest more, this topic or these themes and the application of different theoretical approaches or theoretical schools, to economic development. So I highly recommend Timothy Lem chapter on development in East Asia. So we'll have like one more lecture to go. And in this lecture, I have like a structure in my head, but what do you expect, or what do you want me cover in this lecture, guys? I'll give like wrap-up session anyway, but I need to get like more information or more feedback from you in order to know what kind of areas you need me to elaborate on or to highlight more. Any thoughts on this? And it's related to your final. So how can this help, with your studying or digesting the material? What do you want to hear to help you out, with studying the material? You have some concerns, over the final, right? How can, yeah?
عندنا concerns.
Yeah, okay. How can this lecture would help you with alleviating, these concerns and worries? But don't negotiate, the reading list, or the readings actually
طب
listed.
دكتور
Yeah.
هو
كارما؟
ليه يا دكتور يس ليه يا دكتور الأسئلة ما ينفعش تبقى يعني جنرال أكتر، عشان هو كم كبير
جدا علينا يا دكتور، حتى لو احنا كنا مذاكرين ده كله من الاول، بس اكيد طبيعي هننسى، وهيبقى مطلوب مننا ان احنا نلم في وقت صغير قوي كل الريدنجز والليكتشرز والحاجات دي، حتى لو احنا مذاكرين قبل كده. زائد ان لما الفاينل اتقدم بقى اتزنقنا جدا في الاساينمنتس والكويزز، وكل حاجه بقت في الوقت ده، يعني اصلا ما فيش وقت كويس اللي احنا نذاكر للفاينل من قبلها، احنا عندنا تسليمات لحد وقت الفاينل، فكده يعني صعب علينا جدا. فما بقولش لحضرتك تقللي من الريدنجز او اي حاجه، بس يعني الاسئله تبقى يعني حضرتك تراعينا فيها شويه.
But I have to, yeah, I have to keep the balance.
تاني يا دكتور ما سمعتش حضرتك.
Yeah, I have to keep the balance. It won't be like entirely difficult or entirely easy.
ما احنا فاهمين يا دكتور، بس فعلا احنا اصلا كنا مخصصين الماده دي، انا عن نفسي كنت مخصصه لها اكتر من اسبوع ان انا الم فيها كل حاجه عشان الريدنجز كتيره والليكتشرز كتيره، بس احنا حرفيا لغايه يوم انا عندي لغايه يوم 15 واحد عندي تسليمات كل يوم، ريسيرش وتاسكس وكويزز، والله العظيم بجد لغايه يوم
احنا عندنا
15
اصلا لحد يوم 16 كمان تسليمة القانون.
بالظبط، وابحاث كبيره مش ابحاث هينه،
وده 17 كمان بوك ريفيو
اساسا، فكتيره فعلا. يعني احنا عندنا كويز لسه يوم السبت، وعندنا بعدها بيومين تسليم اساينمنت، بعدها تسليم ريسيرش، بعدها تاسك تاني، فاحنا فعلا عايزين نذاكر بس مفيش وقت.
Yeah, but again
احنا عايزين نذاكر يا دكتور، بس هو الموضوع مش انتحاري، يعني احنا محتاجين يعني هنذاكر، بس يعني بالراحة بالراحة.
يعني حضرتك تحدد لنا كتاب واحد نذاكر منه، يعني احنا اوريدي قرينا ال4 كتب، بس لو كتاب واحد بس يبقى للفاينل يبقى افضل بكتير.
Because I have to give like these thematic topics are not covered, entirely or thoroughly in one source. So I have to give you like different material, and this is, by the way, this is a commonplace thing. Like this is like a university level course. There is no textbook here. Okay.
دكتور بس احنا طول حياتنا الدراسيه احنا مش متعودين على كده، لازم يكون في منهج.
لا يا دكتور تمام، احنا ذاكرناهم وقدمنا فيهم رياكشن بيبرز كتير وتمام، الفكره بس على
that's the thing.
الفاينل بس مش اكتر.
You just have to understand, okay, with the multiple choice questions, you just need to understand the material and to digest them well.
ايوه
دكتور، هو بيبقى في details اكتر. In order to understand them well احنا يعني لازم نقراهم تاني، عشان احنا اكيد مش هنبقى فاكرين كل حاجه احنا ذاكرناها بالظبط يا دكتور، فيعني كم كبير جدا يعني مش طبيعي علينا خالص ان احنا نقدر نذاكر.
I'll cover this in my wrap up session. Okay, so the main like theoretical assumptions of the big four schools, and the main theoretical questions actually we covered with regard to the thematic topics. So this is like the main thing you have to focus on. And the introduction part, like it's already covered in your midterm exam, and I already, in order just to avoid redundancy, I wrote like my comments on Moodle, and I posted them on last lecture slides. So you have like the main like the intellectual movements or the behavioral revolution, and how this actually affected, triggered, some reactions in the field, and how the field actually converged, or the vast majority of scholars actually lies in this eclectic messy center. And then like different, we moved to the main theoretical schools, and we covered, the main assumptions and the criticism of these schools, and then like these thematic topics, how some like big themes and like common themes in comparative politics triggered some theoretical issues or theoretical questions, and how what we studied, from what we got to know and what we learned from rational choice, structuralism, culturalism, or neo-institutionalism with its like variants, how they actually helped us to understand these issues: mass behavior, electoral or contentious, democratic transition and regime breakdown, and state-society relations and state market relations. So you have like with the thematic topics, you have like to understand well the theoretical, what kind of questions these themes actually raised, and how the literature or how the readings actually answered these questions. Okay, so this is the logic and the rationale. And you just need to understand. It's not an essay. You're not going to have like an essay question. which is
دكتور ما هو المالتيبل تشويس حرفيا بجد في التشويسز وكده يعني بيبقوا كلهم شبه بعض قوي بجد كلهم فعلا بيبقوا شبه بنتلخبط فطبيعي حتى لو مذاكرين بنتلخبط ويبقى في توتر وحاجات كتيره فاحنا عايزينها تبقى شويه يعني دايركت شويه مش
yeah
بنقول ان هي كلها
ودكتور
تبقى
كمان
سهله.
ودكتور كمان الكومباراتيف المادة الوحيدة اللي احنا يعني ما شفناش طبيعة أسئلتها ازاي، يعني احنا كل المواد امتحاننا 100 ترم مثلا فشوفنا طبيعة الأسئلة، لكن الكومباراتيف المادة الوحيدة اللي احنا ما شفناش طبيعة
no
الأسئلة
you
فاحنا
had no you had reaction papers. I post the questions and the main I helped you out with posting the main themes.
ايوه
okay
بس باقي المواد
يا
يا دكتور
دكتور ما جربناش نحل أسئلة
على
MCQ
الوضع
قبل كده، ما جربناش
ما
نحل
جربناش
طبيعة
نحل
الأسئلة
you,
دي.
you are talking about multiple choice not
أيوه
yes
multiple choice so you
المواد
actually
التانية
you had midterm as in a form in multiple choice form.
كل المواد
all the time
okay
كل حاجة.
so
الفاينل هيعتبر بالنسبة لنا أول تجربة إن احنا نمتحن المادة
multiple
بالشكل ده.
choice.
ويا دكتور فكرة ان هما
وكمان
25 سؤال ب50 درجة دي يعني مش طبيعية، فاحنا أول
ومفيش
مرة
كمان باك تراكنج فيبقى
Yeah,
صعب
I
جدا
know.
يعني.
This is like, but by the way, I tried my best. By the way, I tried my best, like to
يا
push
دكتور
it.
احنا فاهمين بس السنة دي
طب
استثنائية
أنا ممكن
وضغط
أقول
علينا
حاجة؟
وعلى الدكاترة
Yeah,
وكله.
go ahead.
ممكن يا دكتور نطلب من حضرتك تعملي لنا ترايل كويز بنفس
Okay.
طريقة الام سي كيو
Yeah.
بس
Yeah, I
نكون
can do
شفنا
that.
قبل ما نبتدي اللي هو
Okay.
يعني نذاكر في الآخر.
Okay. Yeah, I can do this. I can do this. So I can post like but I'm not gonna grade this. So I'll post
Ungraded,
questions,
yeah.
and then after you like you tell me that it's after like a couple or 3 days, I can post the answers. Okay.
يعني بنفس الطريقة اللي حضرتك هتحطي بيها الفاينل اللي هو يعني كده.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Okay, I can do this.
ونفس الوقت برضو اللي هو هيبقى في الفاينل نفس الفترة يبقى حاجة قريبة منها يعني كأننا
It's
بالظبط في
like
نفس
mock
الوضع.
exam, right?
أنا فاهمة يعني مثلا 5 أسئلة بس ليهم نفس الوقت اللي هيبقى معادل في الفاينل.
Okay. Let me think about this. How can we do this? Okay. So I can leave it all to you. I can post the questions and I can leave it, up to you just to give it a try. Like I can post like 10 questions. And,
yeah, it's a good idea actually.
Yeah, and then I'll give you like these questions, have to be like answered in 15 minutes. Okay, and then you can like test yourself how much time you talk in order to answer these
طب
questions.
دكتور بعد إذن حضرتك عشان الموضوع يكون متكامل بس هو ينفع حضرتك اللي هتنزليه اللي هو الانجريدد كويز ده يكون بس حضرتك تقولي لنا ان انا هجيب الاسئله دي على اللي اتشرح في كذا وكذا وكذا عشان نذاكر ونخش نحل كاننا مثلا في الفاينل ذاكرنا المنهج كله وهنخش نحل عارفين ان احنا هنحل على كذا فما نخشش كده.
Okay. Yeah. So I can focus on like a specific or 2 themes or like a specific issue or part, right?
بالظبط يا دكتور يعني مثلا كذا المحاضرة مثلا الأسبوعين مثلا اللي فاتوا كده يعني.
Okay, I can do this. So next week, inshallah, okay? So we'll have our...
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. We are going to have our last session on Sunday, and then I'll leave it. I can post like the quiz and get back to you. Perhaps like I'll be available on Wednesday, but it's not like an actual session. This will be like the due date of your term papers. So I'll be available, for you in order to take your questions and talk more about, this mock quiz. Okay.
Okay, doctor. Thank you so much.
And we can decide from now on this. So I can put some questions on rational choice and culturalism. Okay.
تمام يا دكتور.
Okay. Yeah. So let me think about this, and I'll put this on Moodle perhaps like after our last session, and then we can decide how can we go about this. Okay.
Okay, doctor. Shukran.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So see you next week. Bye-bye.